You can watch Star Wars and not believe in Yoda. Why can't you watch this and maybe not agree with it? But what's wrong with a lesson of the Ten Commandments? What's wrong with thou shalt not steal? What's so bad about that?
The new film Noah has riled up the right wing and perhaps confused it as well. Still with me is New York Magazine film critic David Edelstein, and joining the conversation is Anthea Butler, Associate Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. Professor, may I start with you here? As someone who knows
Absolutely.
a thing or two about the Bible, the story of Noah is actually a really short story in the Bible, so it would seem kind of almost impossible to do an entire movie without taking some creative licensing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, when you think about it, it's, you know, maybe a chapter and a half at best. So you have to add some embellishments. So I think what Aronofsky does very interestingly is to put sort of the creation story in the midst of telling of the destruction and the flood story. So I think he's trying to, you know, use some of the elements of the Bible. How he uses them is what conservatives are really upset about. And I think that's the thing that has their hackles up.
David, let me ask you, from the studio perspective, Paramount, we know, was doing special screenings, but seemed sort of flat-footed or unprepared for the response they would get from this film. Did that surprise you, that they didn't sort of anticipate this outcry more?
Well, I don't know if I'm spilling any beans here, but actually Paramount contacted me about a month ago, and apparently Darren Aronofsky had said, you're showing this to religious leaders, but you're not showing it to any film critics. And I actually had a screening of my own about 3 weeks ago, well before my colleagues. I agreed not to write about the film because they wanted to know how film critics would receive this movie. And I'm afraid my response was all over the place and probably confused them because I don't think it's Darren Aronofsky's most interesting movie. But I did think it was very interesting to introduce a kind of Abraham and Isaac theme in it, whereby Noah believes that he has a command from the Creator to essentially slay his own family, to make sure that humans do not survive. It's a very interesting wrinkle to the whole story, and frankly, I think it adds a dramatic dimension that maybe is missing from the Old Testament, if that doesn't sound too heretical.
Professor Butler, David makes a great point here, which is that humans are not seen as the sort of as the top of the food chain, or they are not the be-all end-all in this movie, that animals get sort of their fair share, and that in and of itself seems to be one of the major problems that people in certain circles have with this film.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not giving away everything in the film, but in the mouth of Cain comes out a very big statement that a lot of, I would say, maybe evangelical and conservative Christians believe, in that he talks about, you know, the biggest creation is humanity, and that humans have dominion over everything else, the beast of the field, all of this other thing. And so I think the problem for people when they watch this movie is that if you have that kind of belief going in, if you believe that human beings have dominion over everything, then the preferential treatment that the plants and the animals get, and the fact that Noah wants to kill off his entire family, and it makes it very difficult, really difficult. And also, let me just say one more thing. The part that I had a real problem with was the part in which he not just wanted to kill all the family, but a specific portion if a female child had been born. And I thought that brought up a whole bunch of issues, which, you know, is another story altogether. But I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and there are a lot of complicating issues. Professor, I just ask as a follow-on to that. I mean, the right wing has now found itself in its anger and sort of misanthropic position regarding this film, aligned with some predominantly Muslim countries who have taken issue with the film because of its depiction of false prophets, including Indonesia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain. These are strange bedfellows, are they not, speaking theologically and religiously?
Well, yeah. In a way, they are very good bedfellows, because they both have a sort of way that they want to look at the world, which, you know, those of us in religious studies would say is a fundamentalist viewpoint. On the Muslim side, what they didn't want is you don't depict anyone who has heard the voice of God, who is the prophet of God. So Noah as a prophet of God should not be depicted. On the Christian side, you know, I'll use Eric Erickson for the example. I mean, he's done exactly the same thing that some of the Muslim clerics have done. He's issued his own fatwa by saying if anybody says they like this, they should be burned at the stake. So these kinds of pronouncements that come out about movies like this, and especially a movie where you have it's from the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, and the Muslim tradition, that they all share this same book. I think that Paramount probably knew up front that they would have some problems, but perhaps they should have put in a couple of religious studies scholars to talk about what was probably going to happen, because I think you can make your movies. Anybody has the right to make whatever they want, but it's just the problematic of how people respond.
David, really quickly before we go, does all of this rigmarole, all of this controversy help in terms of film ticket sales?
Well, no. I actually think that it's going to cut down on the number of people who will flock to the film, say the audience that supported The Passion of the Christ. On the other hand, we're talking about it now. If it becomes a kind of cause célèbre on the left, maybe it will help ticket sales. In the end, it's going to be word of mouth. In the end, it's going to be, do people think the special effects are really cool? Does the bad guy get it so it hurts? And we'll see. I don't know how it's going to play with the mass audience.
We shall see. Support the environment. Go see Noah. I don't know. Film critic David Edelstein and Anthea Butler from the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you both. That is all for All In this evening. The Rachel Maddow Show starts now with Ari Melber in for Rachel. Good evening, Ari.
Good evening, and I know what I'm going to see this weekend. Thanks, Alex.